Mojtaba Khamenei Circle may be seeing this as stealthy payback, as yet another Iranian tanker quietly slips past the US siege and exposes the limits of Trump's blockade. The US Navy is now facing accusations of being completely ineffective after Iran's instant revenge strikes forced Washington onto the defensive in the Gulf. An Iranian crude carrier has reportedly broken through the blockade and is now nearing Kharg Island, leaving Trump and his team stunned that the oil lifeline remains active. More than 20 vessels are reported to have sailed past the area of the US siege, while Trump's forces managed to seize just a single Iranian ship, and that two outside the Strait of Hormuz itself. A second Iranian crude carrier crossed the US naval blockade only hours after America seized another Iranian-flagged vessel near Hormuz. According to tanker tracking data, one Iranian crude carrier left Iranian waters in late March, even as the blockade narrative was being pushed hard in Western capitals. That vessel reportedly transferred around 2 million barrels of crude to another tanker off Indonesia in a classic ship-to-ship maneuver before turning back. The same ship is expected to arrive back at Kharg Island on April 22nd, the very day the US-Iran ceasefire is due to expire. Earlier in the crisis, at least one Iranian vessel had already transited the Strait of Hormuz despite the US naval blockade, with its tracking system switched on. An Iranian-flagged vessel reportedly transited the Strait of Hormuz on April 20th, despite the ongoing US naval blockade aimed at restricting Iranian maritime traffic. The semi-official Tasnim news agency reported on April 20th that the Iran-flagged cargo ship Seizure 2 was moving through the strait, underscoring continued movement even under tightened restrictions. The cargo vessel is said to have departed from Shahid Raji port, Iran's key commercial hub near Bandar Abbas, which serves as a major outlet for the country's non-oil trade. Ship tracking data from marine traffic also showed the vessel in transit through the strait, as highlighted in an Al Jazeera report mapping recent movements in the waterway. Meanwhile, Tasnim reported a sharp drop in overall traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, indicating that the choke point has effectively slowed to a near standstill. Citing shipping data, Tasnim said that only 3 vessels transited the strait over the last 12 hours, reflecting the impact of both the US blockade and Iranian-imposed controls. Just one tanker, described as Nero and operating under British sanctions, is reported to have exited the Persian Gulf, suggesting very limited commercial passage. At the same time, only 2 other ships were recorded entering the Gulf, illustrating how severely the flow of maritime traffic has been curtailed in the area. At the same time, the US military released new images of an Iranian vessel it had seized on April 19th, as part of the enforcement of the blockade regime. The US military said that Marines searched the cargo aboard the Iranian-flagged vessel Touska after it attempted to violate the blockade, portraying the operation as a key enforcement action. As the ceasefire moves closer to expiry, the US has seized an Iranian cargo ship, adding fresh tension to an already volatile situation at sea. President Donald Trump announced that the US military carried out the seizure of the Iranian vessel on April 19th. The US military also released footage showing Navy fire hitting the cargo ship while it was out at sea. According to reports, a US missile destroyer intercepted the ship as it allegedly attempted to head toward Iran. The Iran-flagged vessel was said to be traveling toward Bandar Abbas port when it was stopped, according to the US military. US officials say the ship ignored communications for more than 6 hours, which led forces to take action. The destroyer then reportedly ordered the crew to evacuate the engine room before opening fire to disable the vessel. Several shells from the warship's 5-inch Mk-45 gun struck the engine area, leaving the ship immobilized in the water. US troops later boarded the Iranian vessel and took control without meeting any further resistance. The ship is now in US custody following the operation, according to US Central Command. US officials say the vessel was taken into custody after it allegedly tried to break a US blockade on Iranian ports. Iran has strongly condemned the operation as armed piracy and theft, and has vowed retaliation over what it calls a violation of the truce. Donald Trump said, and I quote, "Today, an Iranian-flagged cargo ship named Touska, nearly 900 feet long and weighing almost as much as an aircraft carrier, tried to get past our naval blockade, and it did not go well for them." The US Navy guided missile destroyer USS Spruance intercepted the Touska in the Gulf of Oman, and gave it a fair warning to stop. The Iranian crew refused to listen, so our Navy ship stopped them right in their tracks by blowing a hole in the engineer room. Right now, US Marines have custody of the vessel. The Touska is under US Treasury sanctions because of its prior history of illegal activity. We have full custody of the ship, and are seeing what's on board. Iran has accused the United States of violating the ceasefire after attacking its cargo vessel in the Gulf of Oman. On April 19th, US forces reportedly fired on the ship, disabling its engine before boarding and seizing it. President Donald Trump later confirmed the seizure, saying the vessel was under US sanctions. In response, Iranian media said drone attacks were launched targeting US warships operating nearby. Iranian officials described the strikes as direct retaliation for what they called a US act of aggression. Iran strongly condemned the incident and warned that further retaliation against the US would follow. According to data firm Kpler, over 20 vessels transited the narrow Hormuz choke point on April 18 alone, even as tensions were nearing a boiling point. This was the highest number of ships recorded crossing the strategic waterway since March 1, highlighting a surge in traffic at a very sensitive moment. Out of the tankers that passed through Hormuz, 5 oil ships had last loaded their cargoes in Iran, despite the intense American scrutiny. 3 of those vessels were liquefied petroleum gas carriers, with one reportedly bound for China and another headed to India. Overall, the transit of these ships demonstrated that commercial traffic through Hormuz has continued, even as rhetoric and military moves escalated. Iran and the United States were locked in a tense tug-of-war, as Trump pushed ahead with a naval blockade aimed at choking Iran's key ports. At first, Iran chose to allow ships to continue sailing through the Strait of Hormuz, citing respect for the Lebanon ceasefire and a desire to avoid wider escalation. But later, Iran announced that it would move to close or heavily restrict the strait, pointing directly to the US naval blockade as the reason for this drastic step. Amid worsening tensions between Iran and the US, the Iranian president spoke to Pakistan's prime minister, holding a phone call with Shahbaz Sharif on April 19 as the crisis deepened. Speaking to Sharif, President Masoud Pezeshkian accused the US of bullying and unreasonable behavior, directly blaming Washington's conduct during negotiations and the ceasefire. US actions increase suspicion that it will betray diplomacy, Pezeshkian told Sharif, according to the Associated Press, saying recent moves raised doubts about America's intentions. This escalation came as Pakistan was making efforts to push for a second round of talks between the US and Iran, positioning Islamabad again as a mediator despite the growing mistrust. Trump had said that talks with Iran on extending the ceasefire would resume on April 21, indicating that a new round of negotiations was planned before the truce expired. Trump told Fox News that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff will be heading to Islamabad for negotiations soon, naming his envoys who would lead the next phase of discussions. If Tehran does not agree to a deal, the whole of Iran would be blown up, Trump warned, issuing a stark threat while talking about the stakes of the ceasefire talks. However, Iran indicated that it was not planning to send a delegation for the talks, signaling that it would not join the proposed second round in Islamabad. There are currently no plans to participate in the next round of Iran-US talks, Iranian media reported, quoting officials who said Tehran had rejected further peace talks for now. The ongoing ceasefire is set to expire on April 21 if an extension is not agreed upon, raising fears that fighting could resume once the current 2-week truce runs out.